Welcome to Ignorantia Legis. Today is the 29th of October and it is our episode number 28. Naka-28 na santang episode, no? Okay. And as usual, mag-discuss ng topics magkaisan. We're still in the introductory phase of the law. For today, we will be discussing criminal law. We have already discussed criminal law and introduction, and today we will continue our introduction to criminal law, concepts of criminal law. Wala pa kita sa so ang mala insi ato na nagikuan mala insi mala prohibita. Okay, discuss na sa pro reo doctrine and the applicability and effectivity of the penal code. Rules and jurisdiction sa BFA, naka-discuss na taana. Now, laws of preferential application. Republic Act, by the way, na-miss niyo uban nga lectures, you go to YouTube or Facebook, look at the playlist, or create your own playlist for all the Ignorantia Legis titles, episodes, and you can watch, you can view our lectures there. Laws of principal application. Laws of principal application. Ito ni expand gamay. Klaro ba tong noun niya? RA number 75, Republic Act 75. That's a very old law. Penalizes acts which would impair the proper observance by the Republic and inhabitants of the Philippines of the immunities, rights, oops, sorry, drop down. Okay. Immunities, rights, privileges of duly accredited foreign diplomatic representatives of the Philippines. General rule: the following persons are exempt from arrest and imprisonment, and their properties are exempt from distraint, seizure, and attachment. 1. Ambassadors. 2. Public ministers. 3. Domestic servant of ambassadors or ministers. Hala, di ma-arrest ang kuan pod, ang servant. So nakaikonda suguan ng servant o sila natawanan na, di ma-arrest ang servant of the ambassadors and public ministers. Now, exceptions: if the person is a citizen or inhabitant of the Philippines. Number 2, the writ or process issued against him is founded upon a debt contracted before he entered upon such service, or the domestic servant is not registered with the Department of Foreign Affairs. At sabot ani servant kas ambassadors or public ministers. Note: RA 75 is not applicable when the foreign country adversely affected does not provide similar protection to our diplomatic representatives. It's called the reciprocity rule. B. Warship rule. A warship of another country, even though docked in the Philippines, is considered an extension of the territory of its respective country. This applies to embassies. Offenses committed in warships or embassies, though located in the Philippines, are therefore not covered by the generality principle of our criminal law. C. Principles of public international law. The following persons are exempt from the provisions of the RPC. Number 1. Sovereigns and other heads of states. Exempt siya from the provisions of the revised penal code. Number 1. Sovereign and other heads of state. Number 2. Charge d'affaires or charge d'affaires, charge d'affaires. Number 3. Ambassadors. Number 4. Ministers. Number 5. Minister resident. Number 6. Plenipotentiary. Article 31, Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. Consuls, vice consuls, and other commercial representatives of foreign nations do not possess the status of and cannot claim the privileges and immunities accorded to ambassadors and ministers. So by the way, consuls at vice consul, why labot? Turis ato din na to Chinese ba? Dili ba to sa Pilipinas? Nakapusil ba to? Pero sila wala na pa kay consul ko no? Diplomatic immunity. Relaxan mo din na, oy. Ito kasi lang law itong buwan. Consuls, they're not afforded the same. Lahi na sila. Dili na sila ambassadors, public ministers. B. Territoriality. Territoriality of our criminal laws. 1. General rule. Penal laws of the country, of the Philippines, have force and effect only within its territory. Penal laws of the country have force and effect only within its territory. It cannot penalize crimes committed outside its territory. Aha. By the way, mga general rule, na exceptions na, bantay ang exceptions. It cannot penalize crimes committed outside its territory. The territory of the country is not limited to the land where its sovereignty resides, but includes also its maritime and interior waters, as well as its atmosphere. Article 2 of the Revised Penal Code. Exceptions to the territoriality rule. Exceptions. A. Exceptions. Extra-territorial crimes. Magawas ko nagbar exam kaigsunan. Punishable even if committed outside the Philippine territory. Crimes committed aboard a Philippine ship or airship. Article 2, paragraph 1. Okay? So if the crime is committed aboard a Philippine ship or airship, then that is punishable even if the crime is committed outside Philippine territory. Because, obviously, because the Philippine ship or airship carrying our flags are an extension of our territory. The RPC, the Revised Penal Code, is applied to Philippine vessels if the crime is committed while the ship is trading 1. Philippine waters, intra-territorial waters, or 2. The high seas, extraterritorial waters. Requisites of this crime. Requisites of this it's not really a crime. Requisites of the circumstance of the crime for it to be an exception to the territoriality rule. 1. The ship or airship must not be within the territorial jurisdiction of another country. Except kung warship. Kung warship siya, lahi na. 2. The ship or airship must be registered in the Philippines under Philippine laws. Muna kitawag Philippine flag. Merchant vessels. 2 rules as to jurisdiction over crimes committed aboard merchant vessels while in the territorial waters of another country, or a foreign vessel trading Philippine waters, or Philippine vessels trading foreign waters. For example, Philippine kanya tokas China. There are 2 rules as to what's jurisdiction over the crime. The French rule. The French rule, it is the flag or nationality of the vessel which determines jurisdiction unless the crime violates the peace and order of the host country. Homicide, murder, violation of crime. Number 2, the English rule. The location or situs of the crime determines jurisdiction unless the crime merely relates to the internal management of the vessel. So, the Philippines adheres to the English rule. Kung wa mo kasabot, just replay. Muna yung advantage aning kwanta nata sa internet. We don't have to be together at the same time. Pwede mo broadcast mo, di mo maminaw. Maminaw mo 30 minutes later, 1 hour later, 1 day later, 1 year later. That's no problem. I can save naman it sa cloud, sa YouTube channel, or sa Facebook channel. And then also, kung wa mo kasabot premiere, you just replay. I don't have to repeat myself. You can repeat what I said in your video player. The general rule will create a presumption of jurisdiction and identifies upon whom the burden of proving a contrary jurisdiction belongs to. Thus, when a felony is committed on a merchant ship within Philippine territory, Philippine jurisdiction is presumed, and the accused must prove lack of jurisdiction because the felony relates to the internal management of the ship. Now, foreign warships, lahi ng foreign warships. When the crime is committed in a war vessel of a foreign country, the nationality of the vessel will always determine jurisdiction because war vessels are part of the sovereignty of the country to whose naval force they belong. Note, the country of registry determines the nationality of the vessel, not ownership. Thus, Filipino-owned vessel registered in China must fly the Chinese flag, not the ownership. It's the flag of the registry, country of the registry. Now, international theories on aerial jurisdiction. Free zone theory. The atmosphere over the country is free and not subject to the jurisdiction of the subjacent state except for the protection of its national security and public order. So that's the first theory, that the airspace is free zone. Relative theory. The subjacent state exercises jurisdiction over the atmosphere only to the extent that it can effectively exercise control thereof. So, SR-71 Blackbird na sta atin, na tayo makakontrol ato, di tayo kaabot, wala tayo jurisdiction na to. Absolute theory. The subjacent state has complete jurisdiction over the atmosphere above it, subject only to the innocent passage by aircraft of a foreign country. Under this theory, if a crime is committed in an aircraft, no matter how high, as long as it can be established that it is within the Philippine atmosphere, then that is within the Philippine criminal law. The Philippine criminal law will govern, for example, hijacking. Note, the Philippines adopts the absolute theory. Absolute theory. So again, we are now discussing cases where if the crime is committed extra-territorially, that means outside the territory of the Philippines, it can be still prosecuted under Philippine law. So these are the instances and bar questions na usually. Forging or counterfeiting coins or currency notes in the Philippines. I-appeal ng currency notes ano po sa mga. Forgery, forgery naman, ang destruction na ito, may labot ang notes. Pero i-appeal na by special law. Balik ka. Forgery mo din eh. Of course, forging notes or coins pareha. Punishable. Forgery is committed by giving to a treasury or banknote or any instrument payable to bearer or to order the appearance of a true, genuine document, or by erasing, substituting, counterfeiting, or altering by any means the figures, letters, words, or signs contained within. If the forgery is committed abroad, it must refer only to Philippine coin, currency notes, obligations, and securities. The forgery. So, ilabot ang mga chiki. D. Should introduce into the country the above mentioned obligations and securities. So, first, counterfeiting abroad, punishable by Philippine law. Now, introduction of such counterfeit products from abroad into the Philippines, masakpan ka, Philippine law. The introduction of forged or counterfeited obligations and securities into the Philippines is as dangerous as the forging or counterfeiting of the same to the economic interest of the country. Those who introduce the counterfeit items are criminally liable even if they were not the ones who counterfeited the obligations and securities. On the other hand, those who counterfeited the items are criminally liable even if they did not introduce into the country the counterfeit items. Yeah, the mere fact that they're counterfeiting abroad, punishable na. Now, another exception to the territoriality rule is when public officers or employees commit an offense in the exercise of their functions committed abroad, not necessarily committed in the Philippine embassy or consulate. No, bisag asa, so nakas terminal sa New York, when you're a public officer or a public employee, and in the exercise of your functions, you commit this. Examples. May lang example. The crimes which may be committed abroad in any location abroad, not necessarily in our embassy, basta abroad. And number 1, direct bribery, Article 210. Direct bribery, ha? So ang direct bribery, punishable na siya. So, mag-accept ka o bribe dito sa airport sa New York, then that is punishable under Philippine law, even though you are in New York and you committed a crime in New York, which is outside Philippine law. But if the crime is direct bribery, then as a public officer or employee, then you can be prosecuted under Philippine law. Number 2, qualified bribery, Article 211A. Number 3, indirect bribery, Article 211. Number 4, corruption, Article 212. Number 5, frauds against the public treasury, Article 213. Number 6, possession of prohibited interest, Article 216. Number 7, malversation of public funds or property, Article 217. Failure to render accounts, Article 218. Number 9, illegal use of public funds or property, Article 220. Number 10, the failure to make delivery of public funds or property, Article 221. And falsification by a public officer or employee committed with the abuse of his official position. Number 12, those having to do with the discharge of their duties in a foreign country. The functions contemplated are those under the law, which are under the law performed by the public officer in the foreign service of the Philippine government in a foreign country. There is ato di na kinahanglan exemption paano gina siya, crime na siya na yun, prosecutable din na siya na yun, be persecuted. Okay. Now, a crime committed within the grounds of a Philippine embassy on foreign soil shall be subject to Philippine penal laws, although it may or may not have been committed by a public officer in relation to official duties. Embassy grounds are considered as extensions of the sovereignty of the country occupying them. See Minotcher versus Court of Appeals in 1992. Kining ka Minotcher nga case, daghan kani siya, daghan gawas ni sa bar. Kining ka Minotcher nga case. Kay kini si Minotcher, DEA agent, Drug Enforcement Agency agent. Yeah, nag-operation siya diri sa Pilipinas. Anyway, kung mubar ka, siguro agi makabasagan ni Minotcher case. Now, by the way, do not forget, you must distinguish between a public officer in relation to the exercise of its functions abroad and other citizens abroad committing a crime. Okay. So, if you are a public officer, and these are the crimes which I mentioned involving your public functions like bribery, of course you accept bribery because you're a public officer, then even if it is committed, if you accept the bribe in a New York train station or in a Philippine embassy, inside a Philippine embassy, then you can be prosecuted. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where the location is. Okay. But If you are not a public officer or employee, you're just a Filipino citizen, and you committed murder in the New York train station, committed murder in the New York train station, the Philippine law doesn't apply to you. Because you committed a crime in a New York subway station, New York train station. But if you're an ordinary citizen of the Philippines and you committed a crime inside embassy grounds or inside of a Philippine warship, then even if you're not a public officer, you're an ordinary Filipino citizen, you can be prosecuted. You can be prosecuted because inside the embassy, the grounds of the embassy are an extension of the Philippine territory. So whether private person ka or public person, as long as it's committed within the embassy, sad nyo ka. But if it's committed outside the Philippine embassy, it's in a New York substation, then if you're a private citizen committing a crime which is not a crime, the exercise of a public function, you are not liable under Philippine law. Of course, you're liable under US law. But if you're a public officer and you committed a crime, let's say bribery, accepting a bribe in a New York train station, then you can be prosecuted. That's a big, and always have that distinction in your mind. Kaya magawas na sa bar. Another exemption sa territoriality rule is that if you commit any of the crimes against national security and the law of nations defined in Title 1, Book 2 of the Revised Penal Code, Article 12, Paragraph 5. If you commit those, then that is punishable by Philippine law, even if you are a private person, private citizen. What are the crimes against national security? Memorization gid nimo, gawas na ba? Nagana memorization eh. Number 1, treason, Article 114. Number 2, conspiracy and proposal to commit treason, 115. By the way, it's just proposal to commit treason is already punishable. Just the proposal. And then misprision of treason, Article 106. Misprision, dili prison, misprision, P-R-I-S-I-O-N. Misprision of treason, Article 106. Pasabot na misprision of treason, nakibaw ka nga naay mo commit treason niya, di ka matugan. Misprision. Number 4, espionage, Article 117. So these are crimes against national security, and these crimes, if committed by a private citizen in a New York substation, bang, you are punishable under Philippine law. So many exceptions are exceptions. Crimes against the law of nations. Number 1, inciting to war or giving motives for repression, Article 118. Number 2, violation of neutrality, Article 119 of the Revised Penal Code. Number 3, correspondence with the hostile country. Sa meaning correspondence sa Twitter day ka, Article 120. Number 4, flight to enemy's country. Ngadto ka dito sa Japan during the World War. Article 121. 5, piracy in general and mutiny on the high seas or in Philippine waters. Article 122. So these are crimes which are punishable if you committed them outside of the Philippines, because these are crimes against the law of nations. Note, crimes against public order such as rebellion, coup d'etat, sedition, committed abroad is under the jurisdiction of the host country. Now, terrorism is now classified as a crime against national security and the laws of nations. Appeal ng terrorism. RA 9372 or the Human Security Act of 2007 has extra territorial application. So, aside from the provisions of the revised penal code, the new act, the new law, the Human Security Act of 2007, RA 9372, has extra territorial application. Extraterritorial application. Section 58 sa Human Security Act provides that the act shall apply to individual persons who, although physically outside the territorial limits of the Philippines, shall, 1, conspire or plot to commit any of the crimes in the act. Number 2, commit any of the said crimes on board a Philippine ship or airship. Number 3, commit any of the said crimes within the embassy, consulate, or diplomatic premises belonging to or occupied by the Philippine government in an official capacity. 4, commit said crimes against Philippine citizens or persons of Philippine descent where their citizenship or ethnicity was a factor in the commission of the crimes, and commit said crimes directly against the Philippine government. Territoriality, extraterritoriality application of the Human Security Act. Now let's go back to general principles of criminal law. Generality, and then you have the territoriality, and then now prospectivity. Again, generality, territoriality, prospectivity, all of these have general rules and exceptions, and also exceptions to the exceptions. So it's difficult to follow them, but you just try to connect it logically in your mind. Try to think, if you're the one who committed the crime, tanaw na to, memorize pa sa imong remedy. Prospectivity. General rule. Acts or omissions will only be subject to a penal law if they are committed after a penal law has taken effect. Article 21, dili ni siya retroactive ang acts or omissions subject to a penal law. Na exceptions na mag-exception, as I said, nag-exception na. Conversely, acts or omissions which have been committed before the effectivity of a penal law would not be penalized under such law, by such penal law. Exceptions. Penal laws have a retroactive effect. Not only prospective, but also retroactive effect. Penal law shall have a retroactive effect insofar as they favor the person guilty of a felony. Article 22, maninetabo sa kang Binoy, Padilla, Ruben Padilla. Exception to the exception. The new law is expressly made inapplicable to pending actions or existing causes of actions. So, nagiklaro. On if the offender is a habitual criminal. So, bisan pag habitual criminal ka, Article 22, then the new penal law will not be given, not be applied in your favor. Repeal and amendment. Now, nag-discuss natin sa civil code and civil law of what are the effects of an amendment, of a repeal. Na importante ni sa criminal law, okay? Sa man nagka-crime, may crime, na-crime, may crime. Kaya gi-repeal naman. Kinds of repeal. A. Absolute or total repeal. A repeal is absolute when the crime punished under the repealed law has been decriminalized by subsequent law. Absolute, total repeal. For example, sa una, na-rape, karon wala na crime of rape. That's an absolute repeal. If the new law totally repeals the existing law so that the act which was penalized under the old law is no longer punishable, the crime is obliterated. Like, sa una, crime ng mang-rape. Karon dili na crime. Na-convicted na ka previously. Napaka-suit prisuan. Pag-awasod ka. If it is a total or absolute repeal. So, number 1, pending cases are dismissed, regardless of whether the accused is a habitual criminal, if it is a total repeal. Number 2, again under total repeal, unserved penalties imposed are remitted. Number 3, the offender already serving sentence is entitled to be released unless the repealing law is expressly made inapplicable to those who are serving sentence at the time of appeal. Ako yung bugado, namkihan ako dahil total repeal na sa tupadili na crime, sa una crime niya. Habitual, kihan. Note, habitual criminals will continue serving their sentence. Constitutionally. So, if you're a habitual criminal and there's a total repeal, if it's a pending case, the case is the same. If you have been convicted already and currently serving sentence, then you continue serving sentence. Yung serving sentence life na ko. Yung kaso na. Now, B, a partial or relative appeal. A repeal, sorry. A repeal is partial when the crime punished under the repealed law continues to be a crime in spite of the repeal. If the case is still pending in court and the repeal is favorable to the accused, the repealing law must be applied regardless of whether he is a habitual criminal or not, except when there is reservation in the said law that it does not apply to pending cases. Now, for offenders already serving sentence and it is partially repealed, we're not talking about partial repeal. The repealing law, which is more lenient, must be applied, except when there is reservation to that effect or when he is a habitual criminal. It's partial repeal. Now, what are the effects of amendments of the penal law? Now, we're not talking about total repeal of a particular crime, a particular law. In this case, we're talking about the effects of amendment of the penal code. Now, if the repeal makes the penalty lighter in the new law, the new law shall be applied, except when the offender is a habitual delinquent or when the new law is made not applicable to pending action or existing cashiers. By the way, existing causes of action. By the way, makaigsunan ha. Remember this. Habitual delinquent is not the same as recidivist. So, may yung ganing law, habitual delinquent ra, wala ba itong recidivist? Effects of amendment of penal code. If the repeal makes the penalty lighter in the new law, and that's the effect. If the new law imposes a heavier penalty, the law in force at the time of the commission of the offense shall be applied. That means, whichever is the lighter in terms of penalty. If the fine is increased but the penalty of the imprisonment is decreased, it is not ex post facto law. The penalty is retroactively applied because it's favorable man. The penalty of imprisonment is decreased. Rationality for the prospectivity rule, the punishability of an act must be reasonably known for the guidance of society. People versus Sabinal in 1974. So, di lang sa ta mag-discuss sa constitutional limitations on the power of Congress to enact laws. Kay taas na ang topic. But I hope so far na tayo mga gamay knowledge on the law, on criminal law. Again, you go to Facebook or YouTube and you make your own playlist of all the Ignorantia Legis topics. And you can view from episode 1 to now episode 28. And I hope you learn something by that. And that's only a lecture in introductory law. Okay, so na, mura na mag-law students. So, this is episode 28 of Ignorantia Legis. Salamat yung pag-ikuban ka na ko. Kini si J. Defense, October 29, 2020. Thank you. And good afternoon.